Funding for the Hinckley Report is made possible in part by the George S. and Dolores Doré Eccles Foundation and the Cleone Peterson Eccles Endowment Fund.
Tonight on the Hinckley Report, impeachment proceedings kick into high gear as witnesses provide insight into potential charges. Effects of the impeachment are felt at home as new attack ads target Utah's lone congressional Democrat. Meanwhile, Utah Republicans gather to show their support for the president's re-election. And new polling provides insights to what Utah's voters think about important issues. Good evening, and welcome to the Hinckley Report. I'm Jason Perry, director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics. Covering the week, we have Glen Mills, anchor and senior political reporter for ABC4 News, Nicole Nixon, political reporter for KUER, and Bob Bernick, contributing editor for UtahPolicy.com. Thank you so much for being with us today. So much happening in the political world.
Oh, is there something going on this week?
Okay, let's just jump into it, Glenn, because I know you're staying up nights replaying the impeachment proceedings.
Right.
So a lot has happened, and a lot of it has tentacles into the state of Utah. So our representatives, key takeaways from essentially day 5 of the impeachment hearings.
Well, key takeaway from the week, I think, was what we heard from Ambassador Sondland. He came out straightforward, said there was quid pro quo, and everybody knew about it. And then, of course, after that, we saw, a recess, and Democrats went out and went their way on it. Republicans went their way on it. But that, to me, was really one of the key moments that we saw play out this week. And many other key moments with our own congressional representative and Chris Stuart, who's on the committee.
Nicole, one of the things we talked about is how the Democrats need to make this seem extremely legitimate, that it's not being baked in some way and just like the process is being followed. I know you're interviewing lots of people in Utah. What is the sense of it? Are people able to make up their minds right now, or were they already made up?
I don't think that many people have changed their minds based on what we've seen the last few weeks. There was a poll that came out this week that showed that 2/3 of Americans didn't think they would change their mind about impeachment based on these hearings. And I also, frankly, don't think that most Utahns are glued to their TVs watching these. People have lives. People are at work during the day when these are going on. I think that people will, I don't think people will change their mind. If they believe that this was a witch hunt, they probably still think that. If they think that Trump deserved to be impeached, they probably still think that, especially based on everything we've seen this week with the witnesses.
On Twitter, I follow a very balanced base of, people on the left and people on the right. And I sit and follow the Twitter feeds while we watch these proceedings play out, and it's like we're watching two completely different things. So to your point, a lot of people make up their mind and they're not being persuaded one way or the other.
Yeah, people have decided a lot. Trump has a very solid base. Okay, the base of his base, you can call it that. But then he also has a very low ceiling. And so there's only a little bit of movement in between the two, if you can know what I'm saying. Yeah. So Utahns have basically made up their mind about Trump. But there's other people, and I think maybe a number of Republican Mormons, who have a problem with Trump because of his personal life and how he's conducted himself over the years. And so the question is how many of those Mormons will say, well, I think he should be impeached because of their previous attitudes toward him, as that he's just not a very good man.
Well, let's talk about that space that you were describing, because it's hard to understand exactly what the right course is for these candidates. And I'm going to give you 2 examples from Utah, so let's talk about them, right? Let's first talk about Congressman Stuart. Been a champion of the president. He wasn't always that. We'll talk about that for a moment.
Mussolini. He was our Mussolini.
Yeah, he did say that about President Trump, but now he's all in. And I want to do a graphic from him, because he's being attacked from one side, which we'll talk about, and let's talk about the other side, whether there's anyone can win in this. Glenn, I want to read this quote to you from Congressman Stuart. He says, "The American people aren't stupid. And the American people can hear that, and they can say, I don't think Zelensky was under duress. I don't think he was being extorted. I don't think there was an exchange of a bribe." So this is all in on what these proceedings are. So how is this being perceived? What seems to be kind of defending the process and what the president did?
Well, to the point that Bob just made, where people in Utah aren't necessarily on Trump's side, there are Republicans here who struggle with him. I think a lot of people are wondering, is he representing the mass in his district in being, straightforward? There's no crime here. This is not impeachable, and defending President Trump in the way he is. And I think even I've noticed a shift in my work with Representative Stuart over the last couple of years. His team was always pitching ideas to me about things that were really important to his district that he was working on, like internet privacy, suicide prevention. He also talked and came out against President Trump with the border situation and children being put in cages. But this one, he, and I will say every single Republican that we're seeing in Washington, I don't see one crack there whatsoever, are all in on this. It's not impeachment. This is a witch hunt. It's a show, and it needs to be put an end. But I'm not necessarily certain that that's what his district wants him doing.
Let's talk about that too, because Bob, you reported on this already at utahpolicy.com about there may be a group of people out there that are even now trying to recruit a more moderate Republican for that. Tell us about that.
Well, there is a group of people. I won't mention their names because they spoke to us and asked us not to mention their names. But they are looking to try and find a candidate to run against Stuart. Now, this would be a Republican to run against Stuart. Stuart's pretty far to the right, so this person would have to run from the middle or the more mainstream Republicans, okay? And the person would probably have to have some personal wealth, and the people that we're hearing about do have some personal wealth. So they'll be able to put money into the campaign, and they won't have to get money from some traditional Republican sources who would not like someone challenging Chris Stewart. And only Republicans, registered Republicans, can vote in the Republican primary, so the base is narrowed down. You're not going to have to worry about in the Republican primaries the part of his district, which is Salt Lake City, which really does not like Stewart because it's a Democratic and a progressive place. But there's a pathway there, and it'll be interesting to see. We were talking before as we were sitting in the room before we went on, and Glenn was saying he's heard from some people too, and there's a pathway there for some people to make a serious challenge. Now, you'd have to gather signatures under SB 54, and I believe it's 8,000 signatures you have to gather in the congressional race. So you'd have to get 8,000 signatures from registered Republicans to make the primary ballot, because Stewart would be very strong in the convention. But you can do that.
And that's one thing I would point out real quick, is he is a very solid convention candidate, and he will come out of convention. But take a look at what we've seen since SB 54 was implemented, as far as the way the convention candidate does at convention versus the way they do at primary. They're not performing well in the primary. So I think someone more moderate may take a look at that and say, maybe I do have a path here as well.
Nicole, talk about it, because the reality is that Congressman Stewart's never had a primary.
Right.
He always gets out up on top as much as over 60% in 3 of the times he's run.
He's never really needed to. He's a solid Republican candidate. He does well in convention, and I think overall people have been pretty pleased with how he's done. It's until Trump came into the picture that people are starting to question that and look at Representative Stewart and think, is this the kind of person I want representing me in Congress, when I don't feel that same way about Trump? I think that a moderate candidate who does have money, who could pay for a good primary campaign, might give Representative Stewart a run for his money.
I just have one more thing to add to that real quick. We talked a little bit about defining moments in the impeachment hearings this week. I believe it was Monday or maybe Tuesday when Lieutenant Colonel Vindman was testifying. And there was a moment where Representative Stewart got up and he said, do you always wear your uniform? Because he was there in his uniform. Do you always demand people refer to you by your title? And even people who support Representative Stewart had a problem with that, and they saw it as disrespectful. And that was really a defining moment where Representative Stewart, a military man,
yes, he is,
very loyal to the military, had this moment in the testimony where people might have looked at that and said, he's so dedicated to this president that he's even overstepping his love for the military there. Some people saw that as a pretty disrespectful moment.
Okay, so we've hit one side, which is Congressman Stuart, who has been an advocate. You might say, I wonder how that plays in Utah. You just talked about it. But the other side's not faring as well either, right? So Bob, Congressman McAdams, who was essentially said, I'm okay with proceeding with the inquiry to see if we can find articles.
He voted in favor of the inquiry.
He did. So this is the other side of the equation for Congressman Stuart. But even he's getting trouble this week. Talk about what's happened there.
Well, he's got at least one large group has come in, and it's not one of the far-right Republican groups. It's more of a middle-of-the-road Republican group, and they're putting in $300,000 to pay for Glenn's salary. they're buying ads on TV.
We're getting a small portion of that.
they're buying a big ad buy on TV, which is unprecedented this early on. We haven't even started the re-election campaign yet. It's still a year before, but they're putting all this money into the ad, and they're criticizing him, saying, "Look, you're not doing things like immigration. You're not doing any things like prescription pricing. You're not doing other things, and you're wasting your time and money on this impeachment." Now they're running it now, of course, because the impeachment hearings are going, but they're laying the groundwork for the attacks that are kind of going to come nationally against McAdams.
Well, it's interesting, Nicole. Is there any safe path for these candidates? Maybe just give the Utah lens on that.
I think if there is a line to toe, Congressman McAdams is doing probably the best job he can. He voted for the inquiry. He said he wanted all the facts to come out. He wanted all the facts on the table, and that he would not make up his mind. He would reserve judgment until then. And he's been pretty quiet on impeachment during these hearings. He's been doing work, pushing bills. He passed a bill out of the Finance Committee, I think, or out of the floor on consumer protections and white-collar crime. So he has been doing work. He'll definitely have that to say, to point to. But it will be interesting to see where he goes, whether or if articles of impeachment are pulled out. I wouldn't expect him to, I'd expect him to stay with Democrats on that, but he's in a tough position because he's in the swing district in the heart of Utah.
To this point, though, I'm not aware of him saying at any point that he is for impeachment, only moving forward with the investigation. In fact, I've interviewed him when we started hearing Democratic leaders call for impeachment, and he still said at that point, I don't see it at that high of a bar at this point.
Interesting. Okay, so you talked about this. Before we get into the next phase, though, maybe just a sense of the panel. Does anyone think that the House will not vote to impeach?
Oh, no, they'll vote to impeach.
Our panel says yes. Probably so.
Thinking they will.
Probably so. Yeah. So let's take that hypothetical, because then what happens when it gets to the Senate? So, Bob, if articles are voted on, it goes to the Senate. We have some other interesting political positioning in the state of Utah with Mitt Romney. Yep. So how does he play this one when he has a chance to weigh in?
I don't know. He's gone silent on this because he says, I'm going to be a juror in the Senate, so I'm not going to talk anymore about it. But people have guessed, well, he may be one of the few votes to impeach in the Senate. I have no idea what the man's going to do, and so we'll have to wait and just see on that. But he could bring along a couple of other more moderate Republicans. There could be 1, 2, or 3, but that doesn't really matter because they need something like 19.
Well, they would need 20 if both independents go with Democrats.
Yeah. Anyway, they got to get to 67 votes, and they're not going to get to 67 votes, and so it'll be just like it was for President Clinton. He was impeached by the House, and then he was acquitted at trial. And the real question is how is McConnell going to play this when it gets to the Senate? Going to try to keep it very short and get through it quick, try to extend it out because it may hurt some of the there's 6 Democratic senators who are running for president. And if they want to campaign, they don't want to be sitting in a trial all the time. And the thing that's interesting is I read this article the other day that says when you sit in a trial, the senators themselves just got to sit there and be quiet. They don't get to get up and give speeches like they're giving in the House. So you have to just sit there and be quiet for 2 weeks. That's going to be pretty tough to do for any of those guys.
Do you guys remember a year or two ago when Bernie Sanders was up? I don't remember what the stage was, but he was talking with some other, it was probably a forum with some of the other candidates. And he basically said the biggest mistake we can make right now is to make this all about Trump, Trump, Trump. If we talk about Trump, 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 we're going to lose in 2020. What's happening right now? They're talking about Trump, Trump, Trump. And to Bob's point, Clinton was also impeached and not convicted. But I believe this could be the first time in American history where an impeached president would be seeking re-election.
Re-election.
Yeah.
It is true.
Yeah.
Well, Nicole, it's not like the president has been working on our delegation. In fact, Mitt Romney just this week lunched at the White House with 7 other Republicans. Right. All right. He says he didn't talk about impeachment so much, but is this president trying to convince him?
I mean, the president obviously wants to try to work on people like Mitt Romney where he can. I think they talked about other issues, he said, also. Called it a delightful lunch. I think that Mitt Romney will probably, like he's been saying, keep an open mind and reserve judgment as a juror in the Senate. I believe him when he says that he's going to do that. But there are, again, Mitt Romney and only a few other Republicans that probably have that feeling right now, that feel like this isn't a witch hunt or should just end now.
And I will point out that just like we did with McAdams, Romney has called what happened appalling, but he has not crossed the line and said, I believe it's impeachable at this point either.
Okay, so we still have some elected officials, including the Trump campaign officially being launched here in the state of Utah just this last week. Bob, I know you follow this closely. We had Karen Pence here. What was her message to Utahns as she came and registered?
Well, it was full support of the president, of course, and you need to have somebody from your campaign and come in and authorize to sign you up so you can be on the ballot. We're going to be on Super Tuesday. That'll be interesting.
Yes.
And so that's what they did. It actually kind of flew under the flew under the radar a little bit, I think. And she was in, and then she left again rather quickly. So we're not used to getting any kind of dignitaries here from the Trump administration. So it's nice that she came, but it had to be done. And so I didn't see anything that was outlandish about her coming.
And
it was a pretty small group, but her message was that America is winning under Donald Trump. She touted these employment numbers, job creation, especially in Utah, things that are really popular here that Trump's been doing, like appointing conservative judges, fighting abortion access. Those lines got a lot of applause from that room. It was a pretty small crowd of Republicans, but people loved to see her here. We saw Mike Lee announce that he's co-chairing Trump's re-election campaign, which is really interesting because he did not support the president at all, didn't even vote for him in 2016.
Yeah.
So that's a big win for Donald Trump.
What about the people who were not on that honorary committee? I found that interesting. Of course, Romney's not on the honorary committee for Trump, and also John Curtis down in the 3rd Congressional District. That one kind of surprised me.
Well, it's not random, though, that Mrs. Pence comes to Utah and that the vice president comes to Utah. That's a smart strategic move by the Trump administration. Utahns like the Pences here. Yeah. One thing I wanted to point out is I had a sit-down interview with her lined up, and they backed out on that. I was kind of disappointed to see that because I wanted to really ask her. We've talked a little bit about how Trump can give Utahns heartburn. I really wanted to ask her if her and her husband ever get heartburn on anything they say him, do, or say. But that opportunity.
That's why they backed out of the interview.
Didn't have that opportunity, and I was following Nicole on Twitter, and it just seemed more of a campaign rally than anything else.
She didn't even take questions from reporters that were there.
Let's explore this a little bit, because those are such great insights about who is and who isn't. Because I think I should read, because it is interesting who else is on this honorary committee of the chairs for the Trump victory campaign. So you mentioned a couple: Mike Lee, Chris Stuart, Orrin Hatch, Rob Bishop, Sean Reyes, Stuart Adams, the president of the Senate, and of course some longtime Trump supporters in Utah, Don Pay and Ron Fox.
Yeah, the governor wasn't listed on there, and there were some other leading members of the legislature that were not listed on there. I'm not saying that they're against the president, because they're not against the president, but I'm just saying that they probably thought, I don't know, this is all in flux, and maybe I shouldn't be putting my name out there right now, because you don't know what else is gonna come out of this, and you don't want to be in a position of saying, I'm going to support the man, and then some other stuff comes out and it looks really bad, and then you have to say, can I take my name off of there, please?
It's much harder to get the name off, isn't it?
Yeah.
Nicole, do you think that's why we're seeing that?
Probably. I again think it's just fascinating that Mike Lee has come out in full-throated support of Donald Trump. A few of those other people, Stuart Adams supported Trump in 2016, but again, there are some people that were a little shaky in 2016. Chris Stuart, I think Sean Reyes, that are now co-chairing his re-election campaign.
That is really fascinating. I believe the words he used at that press conference where I took the scenic route
Yeah.
to get to because we all remember the image of Senator Lee and Phil Wright at convention trying to do everything they can to derail Donald Trump at convention.
They were cruise backers.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's fascinating, and that's another interesting point here. Trump didn't do as well in 2016 as you would expect a Republican candidate to do, but how many people that didn't vote for him now, like Senator Lee, took the scenic route and may vote for him now? But that could also go the other way as well. Maybe some that voted for him in 2016 will say, I'm not going to do that again. I think that'll be fascinating to see how that plays out.
It will be. We'll watch that closely. One of the names not on that list, of course, we mentioned is Congressman Curtis. And he's had an interesting week, too. He's weighing into the immigration issue on behalf of the state, sort of representing the Utah way. Nicole, I know you're following this very closely. He's got a plan in place that really to give some power to the states that has usually been reserved only for the federal government on immigration policy. Right.
So he unveiled this bill that would let states create their own visa programs to bring in foreign workers for immigration visas. I'm interested to see what sort of support that gets in Congress. We know that Utah Republicans especially are very welcoming to immigrants as opposed to other Republicans in other parts of the country. So I'd be interested to see if other congressional Republicans bite onto that and if it's able to get support to get through. But this is a very Utah solution. I think you've got compassion to immigrants. You've got creating jobs and keeping, this booming economy going. And you've also got states' rights and local control. It's a very Utah solution, I think.
Yeah. Bob, this is an issue you know very well and have followed for a very long time. Is this sort of a proposal that just has Utah at the heart of it, or is this capturing a sentiment nationwide?
Well, of course, that's why he's doing it. He wants it to be nationwide. But a few years ago, Utah passed, the Utah legislature passed and the governor signed a series of bills that had to do with immigration, and specifically one said that we want to have a worker program, and they even, I think, named a state or an area of Mexico in which they said we want to welcome these people in to do workers, and then you can leave and all of that kind of stuff. But it required some federal waivers, and so it didn't really go anywhere because we didn't get any federal waivers. And it came around the same time as the Utah Compact, which was put together by leading Utahns, and while the LDS Church was not grouped in that group, they did later on say we support the Utah Compact. And in fact, the LDS Church leaders have been very welcoming to immigrants. Half of the church membership now, I believe, is in South America or someplace like that. So we've been very welcoming here. Governor Herbert just signed a letter, sent it back to Trump and said, you send us some more refugees. Now, these are legal refugees, of course, but send us some more refugees. So I think to the benefit of Utah and to the goodness of Utah and its good people, I think that's an important thing, but we can't do much without the federal government. Yeah,
that's what I was going to point out. What I'm watching for here is this conflict we're starting to see develop between state law versus federal law. We see it with marijuana. It's still against the law federally. Many states are moving forward to legalizing it. And there's just this notion that I guess we'll turn the other way. I mean, is that how this is going to play out with the immigration thing as well? Because when you take a look at President Trump and his stance on immigration, you wouldn't think that that would be the case.
But you even see the governor saying this is about a compassion issue, but this is about a workforce. This is about our workforce too. Right. Does that resonate?
I think it does. We have a strong economy here in the state of Utah, and people want to keep that going. And right now, the fact is, we've heard the governor say it, there aren't enough people to fill the jobs that we have open right now, and that's one avenue of getting that done.
There was a lot of complaints here locally when they raided the meatpacking plant up in Logan, and they took away all those people, separated families, did all kinds of what I consider terrible things. And then who are you going to find to go into the meatpacking plant? That's a tough job.
Well, this all leads to just an interesting way to kind of close out the program, because I want to talk about, it's a poll that you did, Bob, at Utah Policy, about whether Utahns trust our elected officials. I thought it was just so fascinating because you asked them national level, the state level, and at the local level. And I just want to throw it out and then maybe you comment and see what y'all think. So Utahns trust local government the most, 45%. State, 38%. federal government, 16%. That's the trust level.
Yeah, and this is kind of the independent nature of Utah, but also of the Midwest and the West. We'll take care of ourselves. It's state rights kind of stuff. We're a big public land state. 60-70% of the land is owned by the federal government. We don't like that. We want to get. There's a lot of work in the legislature trying to get some of that federal land back, and it's not working out very well. But we want to take care of ourselves, and so I think that makes a lot of sense, and it's reflected there. And we don't trust the big federal government.
And there's this perception that Washington is dysfunctional.
Yeah.
People look at Washington and say nothing is getting done there.
Yeah.
We're on the opposite. Their mayors, their city council members. I mean, some cities here you could argue are dysfunctional as well. However, the most part, you look at your local mayor and your city council, and you see them. You can go to a meeting once a week to talk to them, and so there's a little more of a connection there as well.
The number in that poll that sticks out to me is the 38% approval of state government. I wonder what that number would have looked like 2 years ago before the legislature came in and redid some of these propositions that voters passed.
That's true. Well, give me a comment on that,
it probably
too.
would have been higher.
Probably. I mean, is this going to impact some of the major things they're working on this very week, like tax reform?
We'll see. I don't know. I feel like there's a split between the way that tax reform has been done. You have people on one hand saying, hold this off until the legislative session, put this through a normal legislative process. And on the other hand, you have people saying, well, we've been working on this for the past year, and it's gotten more public. It's been through a longer public process than the vast majority of bills that they normally do.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. We're going to have to watch this closely, particularly as our legislators try to decide what to do, kind of based on a little bit of the trust they're getting from the people that have to govern. Thank you so much for your great insights tonight. And thank you for watching the Hinckley Report. This show is also available as a podcast on KUED.org/Hinckley Report or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for being with us. We'll see you next week.